Good day, and welcome to our webinar, How to Apply Lean to Your ERP Production Environment, brought to you by CFE Media and Technology and sponsored by Epicor. We'll be joined today by Dennis Gilhooly and Joe Velez of Ultra Consultants, headquartered in the Chicago area. I'm your moderator, Kevin Parker, on behalf of Plant Engineering Magazine and CFE Media and Technology. Here are some tips to help you get the most from today's webcast. If you're experiencing issues with your slides or audio, refresh your browser or click the Refresh Media button directly under the presenter's picture. Control the volume of this webcast by adjusting the volume on your computer or by adjusting that of the webcast platform. If you are having technical problems with audio or the slide presentation, click on the question mark at the top right-hand corner of your screen to access a list of system checks to try before contacting an online technician. If you do need a technician, type a message in the Ask a Question box and someone will get to you as quickly as possible. Type questions for our speakers in the Ask a Question box on the left-hand side of the screen. The live Q&A session will begin after the presentations conclude. Today's webcast is being recorded. You will receive an email within a week with the link to the on-demand event. To download a certificate of completion, a PDF copy of the presentations, and other additional resources, use the Event Resources tab on the left-hand side of the screen. These documents will also be available with the on-demand version of this webcast. Now we will hear from the sponsor of today's webcast, Epicor. At the conclusion of the video, you may experience a few seconds of silence to compensate for varied internet speeds. Please stay tuned after the video for today's presentation.
Manufacturers are facing a barrage of information about how new disruptive technologies will change the face of their industry. But for manufacturers to embrace mobile, social, analytics, cloud, and Industry 4.0, they must have a clear understanding of the technology value add within the context of today's business environment. With all this talk about Industry 4.0 and data deluge from all the interconnected devices on the factory floor and analysis in the back office, manufacturers may wonder, where does ERP fit into this new digital frontier? The reality is that ERP is more relevant in this equation than ever before, and manufacturers need the ability to contextualize data and integrate it into downstream process flows. To do this, ERP systems must be reimagined to meet the needs of new and emerging manufacturing technologies. Responsiveness demands simplicity and mobility, with tools designed to meet the specific needs of specific users. With an ERP system that delivers this, manufacturers can check off a big box on their Industry 4.0 readiness checklist and make good on the promise of real-time, actionable intelligence.
Welcome back. I'd now like to introduce today's speakers. Joe Velez has more than 30 years of experience working in large multinational manufacturing companies. His background includes all aspects of supply chain management, strategic planning, operations management, ERP implementation, and lean transformation. Velez began his career with Alcoa as an engineer and held numerous positions across sourcing, operations planning, manufacturing, and maintenance. Velez holds a bachelor's in industrial engineering from the University of Puerto Rico and has done graduate research in the areas of lean manufacturing, factory physics, and the theory of constraints. Velez has served on Alcoa's Science and Technology Advisory Council, on the governing board of MIT's Leaders for Manufacturing program, as well as on advisory boards at several major universities. Velez is a founding member of the Industrial Engineering program at St. Ambrose University in Davenport, Iowa. Velez has achieved certifications from Oliver White, from APIX, and is an Alcoa-trained Lean Six Sigma Black Belt. Dennis Gilhooly has 2 decades of project leadership experience pertaining to business process improvement, ERP implementations, and lean manufacturing, as well as other relevant management categories. He has executed growth strategies and implemented innovative technology solutions for clients in private and public sectors. As a vice president at a precision manufacturer, Gilhooly managed all aspects of business and company operations, including strategic planning, staffing, business development, communications, and client management. Dennis has a bachelor's in marketing from Loyola University Chicago and a master's in computer science from DePaul University. He is APIX CSCP certified, PMI PMP certified, and is an IBM trained Lean Six Sigma black belt. Dennis, welcome to today's webinar, and please go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. And thank you to everyone for joining us this afternoon. Today we're going to talk about ERP and Lean. For years, the two have been considered to be in direct conflict. However, we hope to show today how ERP and Lean can be complementary. In fact, many manufacturers have found ways to leverage ERP technology to enable their Lean transformation. In a few minutes, Joe will be taking you through a Lean overview, highlighting the Lean principles, framework, and tools. And then we'll discuss the similarities between Lean and ERP, and how both strive to reduce or even eliminate waste, pull versus push philosophies, use of technology and visual tools. And then we'll spend some time on some of the specific ERP enablers for Lean success. And then finally, we'll visit some of the common challenges faced when trying to implement ERP in a Lean environment. Then we should have some time at the end to address some of your questions. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Joe.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. Okay, so welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us today. And what I'm going to go ahead and jump in to the section that we're calling the Lean ecosystem. The key here is to get a clean understanding of what are those basic underpinnings of Lean concept. We won't spend a lot of time there because it's a very meaty subject, but we want to give at least a broad orientation on it. First of all, when thinking about going through a Lean transformation and creating a Lean enterprise, there are a number of steps that need to be progressed. And in each case, there are very specific sort of summary themes and tools that need to be sort of worked through. The first one is basically begin by understanding value. And by the way, these are typically recursive. In other words, you don't just get done with one piece and stop and never go back. It's really kind of a cycle. So you begin to specify value and making certain that all the value up and down the supply chain is aligned to the customer's view of value. A question that typically can be asked is, will the customer pay for this if I do it? Then once we understand and have value alignment in the organization, we then have to understand our value streams. How are we delivering product? How are we delivering value to the customer? And that typically entails analysis of flow paths, the supply chain, purchasing policies, this type of thing, and making certain we understand the flows that product will be going through, because the very next piece is to actually flow with minimal waste, on time, and adhering to certain basic Lean ideals, which I'll cover in a minute. So as we think about flow and transforming the enterprise, we have to start now introducing the idea of improvement and where I am now versus where I want to be. We then go from having understood flow, only then can we start to put in a make-to-use culture. Otherwise, people become frustrated because they don't really know how product is flowing. And the tools for pull are very specific. We're going to be talking about them here in a moment, but that's the next step on the way to the Lean journey. And then finally, always striving for perfection. So using a plan, do, check, act process to always examine all steps that came before on this ladder and continually improve them. So at this point, again, remembering that Lean has many tools associated with it, it can be kind of overwhelming. But one thing to keep in mind is that those tools should be thought of as countermeasures. They're not really to be used in an isolation of a broader view of waste in your systems. So if I'm not running to the ideal state, how do I countermeasure? Countermeasures are always temporary responses until I can fix my root cause. And this view helps sort of to overview that. Let's start on the left. What is the ideal state for a process? Well, these are 6 typical characteristics of an ideal process. I can run it on demand. In other words, I don't just push, I activate when I'm asked to activate. What I provide is defect-free. And so these are ideals, right? Now, you can't be that perfect, but they're ideal. One by one, if you ask me for 1, I give you 1. If you ask me for 5, I give you 5. I don't give you 10 if you ask me for 1. So that speaks to process agility and alignment to customer demand. Minimizing waste in everything we do in the process, being able to have an immediate response to what's requested. And then the 6th one is do it safely. So this sort of embodies characteristics of a lean process. On the right-hand side, we have this represented in what we tend to call stick figure, which is the notion that the customer asks me for 1, I give 1. And this can be the end customer, or it can be the interim customer in a flow, so that we're not arbitrarily pushing product to the next step in manufacturing if there's no demand for it. That begins to introduce the notion of pull. Looking at lean tools as countermeasures, there's a little table here that sort of gives a couple of examples. For example, I have an ideal state of 1-by-1 production, but I'm unable to achieve it because I have long changeover times. That's my problem. So what countermeasure do I put in place to deal with that? So I might create a store, an inventory accumulation point, to account for the fact that I'm going to be down and unable to produce while I'm having this long changeover. I might actually put Kanban signals into place to make certain I know when I'm supposed to be triggering things, and I don't just arbitrarily activate and waste my capacity. And then lastly, Kaizen, also termed as rapid continuous improvement, but the idea is you got to go to work on root cause. So go chase the improvement and reduce that change over time. So when I say viewing the lean tools as countermeasures because I'm unable to meet my ideal state, this is a kind of a view of that. You can build these out really in every process in your manufacturing process. Every step in your manufacturing process can be defined in this way. This picture, typically you see the Toyota house or Toyota graphics. When we talk about lean, it's more than just the manufacturing process, and it's a broader business system. And so at the end, to underscore that, I'm really speaking to off-the-floor lean as well as on-the-floor lean. But the key message here is that in the middle, we have a series of tools, all to be viewed as countermeasures so that I can improve speed, improve flow, improve quality, and achieve my ideal state. And there's a lot of ways to depict this. I've seen, many, many ways. This is one way that captures it all in one place. So typically in lean, in Toyota framework, we think about what are those tools that I would use to do countermeasures? And there's many that can be listed. These are 14 that are typically discussed in the framework, but there are others. So I'll just briefly go down them. We already talked about value stream mapping and describing the flow of not only product, but information and loop back where rework has to happen, and maybe numerous handouts have to take place, and try to use VSMs to define and find waste and improvement opportunities. Striving for quality at the source. There are a number of tools that can be put into place to try to prevent poor quality, whether that's mistake proofing, automation, which is the notion of giving operators the freedom to stop and fix before they resume and not necessarily call on maintenance, and looking at roll-through yield, so looking at yield as an accumulation of losses, and then using that to problem solve and root cause assess. And-done triggers. And-done is essentially the notion of I'm having a problem and I have standard work, and if I deviate from it, I pull the and-done cord and request a problem-solving event. Another tool set is all related to workplace organization. And you hear a lot of discussion around 5 S's. I'm showing 6 here: sort, set, shine, standardize, sustain, and then adding safe. I've also seen 7 S's where some folks add maximize human development or human capabilities. Total productive maintenance, and RCM stands for reliability-centered maintenance, and it's this notion of progressing from reactive to planned maintenance to predictive maintenance, and down that path, that's sort of the journey toward maintenance excellence. So there's a whole suite of tools that tuck underneath that total productive maintenance and reliability-centered maintenance. OEE is another one, operational equipment effectiveness. Visual management is a significant tool, and that is probably the single biggest difference maker when you start, because one of the key things is that all of the people in your manufacturing plants and in your manufacturing system need to be involved in the problem-solving process, and they're the ones that understand and know and can see the waste as it's happening. So putting them to work and making certain they understand what's expected of them, communicating that to them, and then visually tracking and capturing the health of the system so that exceptions can be reacted to right away. Visual manufacturing leads to daily management boards and a number of tools like that. Setup reduction, I already spoke to a setup reduction idea a minute ago, but this is where things like single-minute exchange of die technologies get taken into account, really to try and reduce interruption from setups and get to that flow, that perfect flow, that one-by-one flow, which is going through and can go on demand. I talked about one-piece flow already, constantly looking to reduce batch size where possible. And sometimes those are constrained by the physics of a process, like in the case of thermal processes. But many times that's not necessarily the case, and there's many artificial sort of soft constraints because it's legacy thinking. Traditionally, we run 10 of these, and there's no necessarily a specific cause and effect. So striving for one-piece flow means that you have to actually unpack all of those things that drive you to batch stuff up. Cellular manufacturing, looking for ways to organize the work in cases where you have the freedom to reorganize production cells. In some industries, that's not a flexibility that you have because of the capital cost is too high. But in cases where you can, if you've identified your value streams, and organizing by value streams is a great way to manage and create manufacturing cells. Standard work is another tool, and a lot's been discussed about that. And the key there is that you have excellent processes documented in how they are going to be performed, and they're monitored and produced and executed in the same way every time. The reason that's important is because where you can't, you trigger problem solving, and you trigger use of a countermeasure to deal with the problem if it's not a transient problem. Balancing work is another technique to try to make certain that work is happening according to the customer demand rate, rather than happening according to what's convenient for unit cost or for something that is maybe an artificial KPI. Leveling and smoothing is the same sort of thing, and then point of use inventory. The inventory has a number of definitions in Lean, and inventory can be used in several ways. One is a buffer. Buffer stock is something to try to protect two pieces of operation that have different batching needs. Usually you look at stores, setting up stores to deal with that. Safety stock is where product might be or processes might be unreliable. I want to protect the customer from my unreliability. And I'm doing this backwards. Buffer stock is when the customer's variability is impacting us. I might choose to hold finished goods. That way I keep a level and smooth production in my manufacturing operation. And the last couple here are probably the two most popular items that are talked about, and that's moving to pull. Now, these are not listed in the order in which you implement them. It's more the way you typically would transform, as I covered earlier in the stair step. But pull is that idea of moving to a make-to-use system so that all work is triggered by customer demand. not only the end customer demand, but the customer that's next in the product flow. I'm not pushing work at them and accumulating inventory when it's not going anywhere. And then lastly, continuous improvement culture is really critical. Kaizen is usually used to describe a specific improvement event that happens, but also a way of thinking. It's this notion of constantly driving for improvement, going to the next state in your voyage to the ideal state. So these are a typical framework, and again, I could name a few others, but these are the big ones that I would say are the lean tools that support the journey. And keeping in mind, we're talking about how ERP supports it. That's what I'm going to get to next. But I do want to just comment that when you think in terms of lean, think about, you can't just start taking a tool and implementing the tool. You have to kind of think about the overall readiness of your organization, any gaps that you might have. And a good framework that we tend to use is looking at these 4 buckets. Is my culture ready? Do I have a continuous improvement mentality? That is my operating system ready? Am I results oriented? Am I managing in a fact-based way? And then lastly, is my company aligned? If the strategies I set, do those make their way down to the shop floor? The findings from the shop floor, do they bubble back up? Those broad categories of continuous improvement and lean are really critical to being able to kind of launch a lean culture or a lean journey. So from there, now we turn our attention to ERP and how they sort of interplay. Those are what I just covered was a bit of a flyby on lean thinking and lean transformation, but really tease it up to now talk about this idea of lean and ERP and how they play. The first thing to get to note is that if you think about an organization, you go from planning to executing, and the more you move to the right, the more your lean system is governing what's going on. So you're actually producing, you're acquiring raw material, you're designing product maybe, et cetera. Is when you're to the left, you're planning, you're scheduling, you're tracking, that type of thing, and you're using ERP and ERP-related tools for that. And the more you come to the shop floor, the more the activity is out on the shop floor. So the lean environment that you've created sort of takes over. Ideally, they have a handshake. So we'll talk about that handshake next here. There are similarities and contrasts, and again, this topic by itself is fairly meaty. So I'm going to just give a flyby on a couple. On the left-hand side, we have lean technology, or I'm sorry, ERP and ERP technologies. On the right-hand side, lean enterprise thinking. So if we were to contrast the two, you'd start on the left. ERP, you've got a set of business processes, methodologies. They either come straight out of the box or you work with your ERP provider to design them, and you enable processes with them. So essentially it's tools that you're having, but it's in a structured way. On the lean side, it's a philosophy of work, focusing on what we talked about earlier, elimination of waste, making certain you're running make to use, and flowing. On the left-hand side, then if I drop down one, for ERP, you got to make certain that you configure it to minimize waste. Key is during the design part of an ERP implementation to understand what are the best process designs for my business. You don't necessarily need to use what ERP gives you out of the box, but you do need to think about what your best designs are, and so it's important to understand your ideal future state. On the lean side, you're always striving to eliminate waste. You don't need to configure it. You've adopted a whole system, a whole philosophy. On the left-hand side, ERP is kind of order-based, whether that's a forecast order or a firm order, where lean is more flow-based. Keep the flow going, understand what interrupts my flow, manage or countermeasure the things that interrupt or hurt my quality and my flow and my customer service. Of course, ERP uses a computer and all related technologies. ERP will trend toward being more visual. I think I accidentally jumped ahead here, sorry. Will trend to being more visual. And there, the thing is that the traditional lean will tend to say, well, don't use the computer. But generally what we see is the idea of trending toward visual is augmented or enhanced by having an overlay of an ERP system that's giving me information, collecting information so that I can react to problems. And finally, ERP tends to default to push, and we'll talk a little bit more of that in a minute, because when ERP systems are set up, they actually make assumptions around how much time certain things take, and they push material or they push activity. They have to be configured so that they're triggered by pull signals, and that's the call out here, where in Lean, the whole philosophy is a make-to-use philosophy. A quick note on manufacturing strategy as you think about your manufacturing strategy. If you're on a Lean project already, or you're on a Lean journey, or if you're thinking of launching one, you still need to derive your manufacturing strategy. If at the same time you're working on an ERP project or seeking help as you plan on moving toward an ERP project, they can shake hands, and they can be a handshake. On the left-hand side, the process enablers that you have, and this is very process-centric. What do I want to be when I grow up? What should my future state processes look like? What are my gaps? What are my forward-looking plans? And then I need to decode that so that I know the very specific process behaviors that I need, whether that's pricing, planning, scheduling, shipping processes, whatever they may be. A solid business process improvement methodology needs to be used there, because this is independent of any ERP package. It's the idea of knowing here's what my target state processes are going to be as I maneuver and go through that Lean journey. At the same time, this slide is making the assumption that you're starting to work on ERP. The right-hand side is emphasizing a couple of key points for the handshake to happen. One is that you have to select the right package. Obviously, if you select an ERP package that does not support the critical process needs you have in your future state, you're toast, right? Our ERP packages are highly configurable, but still there's many aspects, depending on what your requirements are, where certain packages may not satisfy it or won't be good at it. Then you have to also keep in mind that ERP packages need to also, they kind of bring certain process behaviors with them, and in many cases they're actually even best-in-class processes. So you need to decode those capabilities and match them up with your future state from the left-hand side. And that's the message of this slide, that in order to create your manufacturing strategy, you need to do both. Understand what your processes need to become. That comes from your business strategy. Understand what the ERP packages gives you and any capabilities it provides that you can leverage to achieve your process vision. And so in the middle, you have the need for mapping your future state processes and driving Lean maturity, leverage or springing from an understanding of the capabilities of what the ERP system is providing to you. Okay, a few comments on enablers for Lean success. And so we're going to get a little bit specific here now. And in these cases, I'm not necessarily going to go point by point. There's some certain foundations, first of all. So if we've already mentioned a few things in Lean, and we've talked about sort of the handshake, the contrast between the two. Now we'll turn our attention to ERP more so and talk about what are the foundations in ERP that support my journey in Lean. Well, first of all, it's business process excellence. The notion that I can set up a process, whether that's how I price, how I design, how I plan, how I schedule, how I make up loads, how I tender loads, how I ship, how I close my books at the end of the month. Those are all examples of processes. And in ERP, you can't have, I'm going to do it this way this time and this way, a different way next time. So it does bring out of the box a notion of process excellence, assuming that you do a good job of designing the processes. Speed and agility, you have an opportunity, and Lean packages have an opportunity to enable speed and agility by reducing handoffs and providing visibility when processes go haywire. That's a key. Creating and reinforcing what we call PDCA discipline, plan, do, check, act discipline. In the old school, you have in legacy manufacturing, you have a meeting and you're going to make a decision because you have a significant situation at a bottleneck production center, and you gather information and you come and make a decision. In an ERP-enabled environment, a foundational principle is that by just logging in, you'll be able to see the status of your processes and actually have it be a drill down capability so that you can actually plan your work right in real time. And leveraging that takes a level of process excellence and maturity, but it's available. So that's a foundation. Fostering continuous flow communication, being able to trigger workflows and alerts as things go south, or if they go south, then that's another thing. And that all kind of, the sum total is providing a foundation for continuous improvement. The one thing I'd say too is that this notion of, in legacy systems, we tend to learn how to deal with problems in a very silo way. And the more experienced folks in a legacy system are really good at detecting where a problem is caused by somebody upstream. In an ERP environment, processes are designed so that there's interdependencies from the time of order placement to the time of shipment. So driving out that silo thinking becomes something that enables everybody to think differently, and the process improvement mentality kind of grows. So how do we activate, if those are foundations, and how do we activate them? Well, we want to make certain that we use the lean journey to set up ERP. Wherever I may be, if I'm in the very beginning of my lean journey, if I'm very mature, if I reach a certain level and now I've been backsliding, wherever you happen to be, it's important to begin an ERP project by understanding where you are so that you don't bake in to the ERP process designs poor process thinking that don't support your strategy. Understanding future state, make sure you understand your future state and leverage that future state to lean out or get rid of wasteful processes. We see a lot of clients that take advantage of an ERP implementation to finally eradicate certain things that have been lore or legacy thinking in their legacy tools. So it's an opportunity to realize future state. A must-have is the idea of marrying lean cycle time and making certain the progress, if you're working on lean and if you tackle, for example, cycle time reduction, improved flow and faster flow, that the ERP tools need to be informed. If ERP tools are not informed, then you're gonna have extra inventory, because what's going to happen is you're going to drop your flow time from 10 to 5 days. ERP package doesn't know it, so it's going to call for raw material and releasing work into production as if it was going to take 10 days. In reality, it's only going to take 5, so you'll have a level of inventory that you don't really need. So in order to really bring the cash register, as you improve cycle time, it's really critical to update the ERP system. And then another way to activate the enablers of ERP for lean is off the floor. Keep in mind, this isn't just about the shop floor. It's about off the floor, and a lot of best practices are baked into ERP packages for procurement, for finance, for the planning functions and scheduling functions. Here's an example that we'll give you. We think about this as a very traditional look. We look at the water represents the inventory levels, and the rocks represent all the things that cause me to have high inventory. Whether that's maybe my planning processes are poor, I have long changeovers, so I have a lot of high batches. My schedules aren't valid, so I run something, I run it out of order, or I have to reschedule. When I do that, that adds to inventory. My quality is poor. There's a number of things that can be listed here, equipment reliability. So the question is, how does the ERP help me reduce inventory? Well, ERP will impact, let me see if I can get this to come forward, will impact each one of these. And so these little dots are representing the ones, for example, changeover. ERP can decode and baseline where my changeover is, and even help to break out the information details I need to know where to attack. But that's as far as it can go. Then you have an actual improvement project that engineers, process improvement people, metallurgists, whatever it might be, need to go tackle. On the other hand, there's certain key areas here, certain key rocks that ERP strikes front and center right in the middle of, whether it's schedule, paperwork flow, quality systems, planning. Those are all areas, improving process designs, those are all areas where there's a significant help from ERP. And if you seize on those, you have an opportunity to improve flow and to reduce your inventory levels. The next couple of pages are providing sort of an overview of very specific. So now we're sort of continuing to drill here and become more granular. And so I'll just sort of mention a few examples here. But these are specific ERP functionalities embedded in today's ERP packages that either you're already leveraging if you have an ERP package, or you will have the opportunity to leverage. And if you do have an ERP package, you need to ask yourself, am I leveraging it to the max? So these are some examples, whether it's backflushing, supporting a philosophy of flatter bill of materials. In many cases, we see bill of materials being overcomplicated or not maintained. And an ERP implementation is an opportunity to actually re-engineer bill of materials. Physical inventory. And so there's a number of sort of pragmatic janitorial type processes that ERP facilitates and automates, whether it's cycle counting, operational KPIs, operational reporting. We talk about business, BI, business intelligence. I like to think of ops intelligence or manufacturing intelligence, because with ERP, now I have the opportunity to actually collect. I can have it real time. I may not be able to react real time, but I can collect tactical information that I can use to manage what's happening on the shop floor and prevent bad performance, not just get to the end of the shift, at the end of the week, the end of the month, and say, wow, that was a bad month. I wonder what happened. Instead, the idea is to leverage tools like ERP and MES systems to know where I'm heading south and actually do something about it before it impacts me. Improving supplier collaboration. ERP packages have supplier portals embedded, and especially if you stratify your suppliers, you can put into place different buying strategies and different collaboration approaches with more strategic suppliers, always leading to better quality from the suppliers and better timeliness, which lets you reduce unit costs and reduce inventories. Many improvements in planning tools, providing collaborative tools. I won't really dive into that too much, but those are all things that can be used to leverage how much I plan and understand my demand and understand how I'm going to satisfy the demand. Supporting Kanban and being able to actually set up a pull framework or pull thinking. I always tell people, doing pull isn't about doing Kanbans. It's not. It's about make to use and making certain that flow occurs according to the demand that's required for the customer and according to the design of that flow path. And ERP tools provide for that. Paperless work order completion or paperless completion, that can be a radical leap forward for many folks. For some of you, it's incremental, but ERP, it can be set up and is well able to support that. A few other specific examples. In your manufacturing systems, not everybody has the luxury of having an operations set up where you just make to order operation. In many cases, we have mixed mode operating models where we have engineer to order, make to stock, make to order, and a few others, all mixed in under one roof. And in ERP, you can actually set up the way you manage demand, the way you plan for supply, the way you replenish raw material, the way you release work out on the floor. All of that can be set up differently inside of one common ERP system. The reason that's critical is because if you're doing lean, the last thing you want to be able to do is say, geez, I want to move in my make to stock product differently. I want to change the way I manage that, but it's too bad my ERP system doesn't support it. That's an example of very bad stuff. So we want to be able to have flexibility, and ERP systems today are specifically set up to permit that. I talked about manufacturing intelligence already, whether that's vendor managed inventory, streamlining communication, and giving supply chain visibility, KPIs. Social collaboration is something we're seeing quite a bit. In order to really foster communications between marketing that's not always and most frequently not co-located with operations, being able to interface between what marketing is seeing, sales is seeing, and operations is seeing is becoming a major leverage point. ERP tools provide what we call 360-degree view of the customer. So at any point in time, I can see what's coming, what's there, how well they pay, what leverage points I have, and how I need to go and manage the relationship, and then how I need to provide supply. And then lastly, providing support and information that we need for outsourcing, insourcing. There's also right shoring, how much should be made offshore or onshore for those of you that have international options. A few other examples. One thing that I'll note is the use of barcode and Internet of Things. That's a current discussion, and it's definitely emerging technology, and mobile supply chain applications or mobility applications is another one. All ERP packages really facilitate that. And in your business, if you don't have an ERP system, you probably have already migrated towards scanners and barcoding. Those things began happening some years ago. In this day and age, ERP systems are actually baking in those tools so that as you're looking at operation status, as you're looking at shipping status, inventory status, you actually are seeing real-time movement and can make better decisions if you have a disruption in the supply chain. Those things can all be leveraged for what we call control tower, which is that notion of maintaining an end-to-end understanding of my entire supply chain at all times and making the right decisions to deal and provide maximum customer service. Okay, so we're on the home stretch here. So all of that is good background, and I think hopefully helps you understand not only a few things about the broader lean perspective, how ERP handshakes are different than lean, and then some of the ERP functionalities that support lean. In Ultra's experience, we're agnostic in terms of ERP package. We do many ERP implementations, and we help clients with business process improvement projects. And one of the this is just kind of a simple summarized view of some of the challenges we see when implementing ERP. And I sort of mentioned some of these, but connecting ERP, MRP planning, and lean execution. So that's back to making certain the demand is understood and the raw material plan is aligned with the fast flow that's happening. And that's something that has always got a challenge and requires designing and making certain the design is correct. Some of you may be familiar with the term plan for every part. That is a great thing to say, very difficult to do in legacy systems, but understanding what my parts are and making certain that I understand how each part is going to be replenished is something that ERP systems specialize in, but there are many choices in how to set it up and how to trigger replenishment. So that's a challenge we see. Visibility to the magnitude of change. This is all about change management. Non-technical issue, but when you're doing something that's this sweeping, it tends to be a sea change for organizations, and making certain it's a lot like having a plan for every part, more like a plan for every person, plan for every department and role and so forth. Setting up for mixed model, who to protect. In cases where you have flows that go across a common piece of equipment, who do I protect? Do I protect my engineer to order product if it's coming across this production center? My make to order, my make to stock, that's always a design question, so that's a challenge. Transactional burden in legacy systems, you always tend to have old school controls, as I call them. That's way too many approvals. If there's lack of trust, I might hire the great people, but they have to bring me everything to approve it. Well, ERP provides for automated decision making and workflow. So it forces a different way of thinking to release control to the places in the process where it's most effectively decided. That can be a challenge, and certainly it's a culture change. If doing the implementation with your head down without even thinking about the lean direction that you want to go or are going in, that's a challenge and can be a miss. The tendency to treat process exceptions like if they were standard requirements. Probably the number one challenge during ERP, the design phase of ERP processes, is that process owners tend to think that every last thing that ever has happened or could ever happen needs to have a design. And that's a kiss of death during an ERP implementation. It's really critical to design for the 80-20 and then put into place exception processes to deal with exceptions. One thing, any number of bad habits that you can have that's coming out of a non-lean environment need to be dealt with in order to calibrate with lean. So with that, just to wrap up, this sort of summarizes, if you go around at 1 o'clock and kind of work your way around, what's listed here are a smattering of example of tools that support lean journey. So for value, whether that's automating unnecessary tasks, providing a 360-degree view of customers, for understanding value stream to assist in process modeling, information visibility and performance measurement all along the way. For flow, providing synchronized data flow, line balancing technique, rate-based capacity planning. I didn't mention capacity planning earlier, but ERP systems are expert at that, and being able to move from what might be a traditional set of hard and fast assumptions to something that's an engineered set of capacity is a really key way to enable flow. Moving to pull and make to use, ERP packages support production leveling, Kanban, visual manufacturing, and Egypt, which is like, where a supplier is allowed to look inside your ERP system and is authorized to replenish based on things they see. So I am calling it here electronic just in time. And then striving for perfection. All the data that those systems are providing, all will help and support the mission and the journey of going through and becoming a manufacturer that has processes functioning in an ideal state toward perfection, whether that's root cause analysis, performance measurement, etc. So with that, I will hand it over to Kevin.
Well, thanks, Joe. That was a really thorough, intense overview of the relationship between ERP, two very complex subjects, I think most people would agree. How has the relationship between the two changed over time? I mean, when I was first introduced to ERP or Lean back, say, in the 1990s, it was my impression that there were advocates of Lean who were adamantly opposed to MRP type planning. And I just wasn't sure if that kind of animosity could be sustained over time. Have the advocates of each approach gotten closer over the years, or what has been the evolution of the relationship?
Dennis can jump in. My reaction is this, that what we saw 10 years ago was that ERP vendors understood Lean, but had not yet fully folded in Lean management capability, whether that be a flow, make-to-use tools into their offering. Those days have gone by. In fact, today, many and most ERP vendors offer capabilities that are very positively supportive. And we've seen vendors continually improve the excellence of their processes. Business process benchmarking has also been a big contributing factor, I'd say.
Good, thank you. Dennis, let me turn to you for a question that's not so much about the relationship of ERP and Lean, but it's a little bit more topical. I attended a presentation by a manufacturing company that was sharing its best practices in light of the COVID-19 crisis with about 200 other manufacturers that were on the call. And the thing that puzzled me at first, and I realized, was that it had taken them back again, as I say, to this 1990s environment, because they were talking about key paper-based documents that they were using to manage how people were working within the plant, what kinds of self-assessments they were doing inside their facilities, and so forth and so on. Could you give me a little background on how you think ERP vendors or suppliers are going to respond to the current crisis?
Well, I think most manufacturing and distribution companies are going to be looking to do things more efficiently, doing more with less. And in order to do that, they're not going to have all of the resources that they had pre-COVID, whether that's personnel, funding, or whatever. So they're going to be looking to operate more efficiently, and they're going to have to implement new systems, put new systems in place that will allow them to operate more effectively. And it will be done through ERP systems as well as looking at various Lean initiatives.
Good. Joe, did you have anything to add to that? I mean, I was just really struck by how quickly things reverted, as I say, to paper-based documents, and now I'm already starting to see news releases about software functionality being introduced in relation to COVID-19.
Yeah, well, this is kind of a moving picture, so it's kind of a tough one. To Dennis's point, folks are trying to find their way, and in many cases, what they've assumed about their processes are no longer valid, and so it's really almost an industry by industry, company by company thing. The capabilities exist in ERP to go paperless or paper-based. The capabilities exist in Lean, whether it's in an ERP environment or not, to go paperless or paper-based. The question is how to design a future state process that is safe and allows for those handoffs to be safe. Still a research question,
Good. Well, thanks. We are certainly going to be looking at it here at Plant Engineering. Joe, let me ask you another question from one of our listeners, and they're asking, they're considering projects which will require coordination between multiple service firms, and I think they're just a little bit wary of the communication challenges there involved, and they want to know what thoughts or suggestions you might have in that regard.
Yeah, my assumption will be that this the person that submitted this has already gone through a process improvement cycle and defined their future state. And as they selected their ERP vendor or vendors or service providers, they now are faced with, 1, 2, 3, several. And the key piece of advice there or thinking there is have one common design, build, delivery process as part of implementation, one methodology for all of it. Because the handoffs, the integration points are going to be the key. Integrations, a lot of, if you think about ERP risks, when implementing data, people, and integrations, those are the three. A lot of folks think, well, my processes are very complicated and specific. It tends not to be the case. It tends not to be the case where processes cannot be dealt with. It's more, are the integrations too complex? Is the data right? And are the people able to tolerate the amount of change we took on? And those three things are the ones that tend to be the big blocking and tackling elements.
Good. Dennis, a question for you. You can't really have a discussion about ERP nowadays or any kind of enterprise software application without talking about cloud and how cloud modality has kind of revitalized ERP markets so that they're growing at a steady rate, and at least they were until very recently. And, we would expect that in the future. What do you think are some of the main talking points when it comes to cloud-based enterprise systems, and what do you see as their future?
Well, it's all about security and confidence level. As recent as maybe 5-6 years ago, we would have to initiate the conversation around cloud-based technology with our clients. Now, many, and if not most of our clients are coming to us asking about SaaS or cloud-based solutions. And that just shows the shift in confidence level around the security of their data. I think people are becoming more comfortable with, doing the online banking and all the various different forms of cloud applications. And they look at SaaS or cloud ERP as a way to offset their IT team. So they may not have internal IT expertise in order to support an on-prem solution. And so by moving or shifting over to a cloud environment, they get to shift a lot of that responsibility back over to the vendor.
Good, thank you. Joe, a question for you. One of our listeners is asking, what does it mean for back office functionality when you're implementing Lean? Does it even have any application there at all?
Lean in the back office, you're saying, well, first of all, lean applies off the floor in the back office or on the floor. That's firstly. Secondly, ERP packages routinely and have out-of-the-box capability to really, really lean out, if you want to allow me to use that term, processes, especially in the back office area. We're seeing leading practices from procurement, finance, planning, scheduling being integrated into out-of-the-box ERP solutions. But when we think about lean and going off the floor, all of the same things apply. I want to make to use. I want to process things when I'm requested to process them. I want to have minimal handoffs, in other words, reduce waste. I want to make certain that I'm doing things when they're supposed to be done and at the quality level they need to be done. So there's a lot of the same tenets apply when analyzing off-the-floor processes, whether they be in finance, procurement, marketing, that type of thing.
Good, thank you. Dennis, a question for you. I mean, when ERP first was introduced, it had financial functionality, it had HR functionality, and it had production functionality. But today, if you look at the most modern packages, I mean, it is the single source of truth for the entire enterprise. Is there any limits to what kinds of functionality can be incorporated into today's ERP systems, and where, if anywhere, do you think they're headed next?
Well, we're seeing more and more functionality being incorporated into many of the ERP systems. It depends. Some of the larger tier 1 solutions will include more, and as we scale down, they become more specialized. It all depends on what exactly you're looking for from a functionality standpoint, and how specific and how immediate or exact is your need. There will be some solutions that will touch on certain functionality, but may not get as deep as you need in order to support your business processes. And with those, when that's the case, you may have to integrate with an additional system. But we're seeing more and more systems that are becoming completely inclusive.
Good, thanks. All right, well, we're coming to the end of our time today. I'm going to give you the opportunity to answer the final question, and that's one of our listeners is asking, how can I really tell if my lean journey is not being supported by my ERP system?
Okay, it's a good question. If I'm going on a lean journey, one of the key things is that I have an understanding of what I want to be when I grow up. What is my future state system? And the way to tell if ERP is not supporting my lean journey is if I cannot satisfy or deliver that future state process design in ERP. Very simple. Now, I say that's a macro statement. That's a high-level statement. I really mean it at the level of the individual process. And one of the ways to achieve that is to make certain that the key process owners are part of the implementation team, and they understand, they're key process owners because they understand that in a given process area, whether that be quoting, for example, estimating, design, whatever it might be, they know what they want to be, what that future state, ideal state is for that process function. And they're well equipped to sit in ERP and go process by process, step by step, and match the two up. And if they can't do it, then you've identified a disconnect where the ERP activity is not supporting my lean journey. When those things are found, they need to be escalated, because those are things that get in the way of delivery ultimately of the future state lean journey.
Great. Thanks, Joe. And thanks to you, Dennis, as well. We'll look forward to speaking with you sometime in a little bit more depth about lean. But that's all the questions that we have for today. We'd like to thank our speakers, obviously, for sharing their time and expertise. We'd like to extend special thanks to our sponsor, Epicor, and for sponsoring today's event. And now that we're just about done, we'd like to hear how we did. The exit survey will pop up on your screen as soon as the webcast ends. Please take a moment to complete it because we use this information to improve our webcasts. Finally, on behalf of Plant Engineering and Epicor, I'd like to thank you all for attending. This concludes our webinar. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.